welcome to All Rise. It's me once again. I do this every time. I should know who we are by now, I would say.
I think so.
If you don't know us by now, you will never sing it.
But I am Derek Caldwell, and this is this is Abdu. I'm Abdu Murray.
I'm Abdul Murray, and
don't do it.
We are okay. Abdullah the Butcher. We got to bring.
Yeah. That came up last time.
But we are here once again. We have a great guest with us to share with us her story. So they don't, we're the least important people in this virtual room right now because we're joined by someone who you got a chance to be on her podcast not too long ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Renewed and Transformed.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we are joined today by, again, a really courageous person, Kyla Gillespie. It's great to have you here with us.
Hi, thank you guys. Such an honor to be with you, and I can't wait to, just talk with you guys and go from there. It's exciting.
Yeah, well, we want to get to your story and your ministry as well. So you run Renewed and Transformed, which is a ministry that really is dedicated to sharing the Christian faith on sexuality and gender as well. And so with that in mind, it's a great way to just jump right into your story. You're someone who has gone through a gender dysphoria to transition to detransition, and just want to hear what that was like, what the story is like, how your faith played into it, and all that stuff. So, when did you really first start to struggle with your gender identity?
Yeah, it was at such a young age for me. There was just two particular moments in my childhood when I realized that I was different from most little girls, and it was probably about the age of 5 and 6. One was my family loved sports, and my dad loved hockey, and so did my younger cousin, and my brother was playing hockey at the time. And I wanted to play hockey just like everybody else. And my parents ended up putting me in figure skating, which, is a great sport, and thought probably that this would satisfy me just being on the ice. But it was one fateful St. Patrick's Day event where my parents came to me and pulled out this green tutu. And, I didn't have any language at that time. I didn't understand what was going on at all. I just knew that I wasn't comfortable in a fluffy green tutu. And so that was like an impactful moment. And then I cried and begged and asked my parents to put me in hockey like my older brother and my cousin. And they finally gave in and put me into hockey. And one specific moment at, probably 5.5 years old is my parents came to me. I remember it so clearly. And it's funny because I don't remember most of my childhood, but some way this impacted my childhood. And I remember sitting on the cold bench in a rink, and my parents came to me and they said, Kyla, coaches and parents have asked that you change in a different dressing room. And I don't remember what I said, but I just remember, feeling awkward, uncomfortable, and really sad. And I remember thinking, because this specific thought came to mind, is like, why can't I change in the same dressing room as all the guys? Like, why am I so different than all the boys? And I don't know what my parents said at that moment, but it was an impactful time where I realized in some little capacity that I wasn't a boy. And so as I was growing up, it started to intensify as I got older in my teens.
So my question is that, now women's hockey is a thing. Like if you wanted to play hockey, you'd play with women. And a former colleague of ours, who I was still in ministry with, Alicia Wood, plays hockey, and she plays on a women's team. And there are co-ed things as well, and that kind of thing. But back then, that wasn't a thing. Like you couldn't. There was no women's hockey.
No, this was the mid 80s. I'm going to, put my age out there, but mid 80s, no. And I lived in a small town on Vancouver Island, BC, on the west coast of Canada. And it was a smaller town too than Vancouver, BC. And in there, we just played together, boys and girls. There was no gender specific teams probably until after I was about, I think like 14, 15, that started to happen.
Okay. So then you have this experience basically where you are playing with guys and you're doing your thing, and then someone says, could you change somewhere else? And obviously, you're young. You were 5 or 6 or something like that at the time.
Yeah, it's 5.5, 6.
Yeah. So I mean, sometimes there's this gender differentiation that happens with boys and girls. They start to recognize the differences, but a lot of times, I remember the girls were as strong as the boys and would knock them down right around 5 years old, and then that started to differentiate as time went on.
Yeah.
So yeah, not seeing a difference at that point was probably not an abnormal sexual differentiation at that point, but that moment's pivotal.
So. Yeah.
That moment was something. Yeah, that's interesting. Let's go on from there.
Yeah, and so it was pivotal because I realized, like I said, in some little capacity that I wasn't a boy and I was confused. And so I always liked to play sports, and, every sport, we played street hockey at home after school, and I played sports in school, and this was just a thing that I did. So I started to get a label of a tomboy. And that actually was kind of freeing to me because I got along with boys more than I got along with girls anyway. And so most boys were my buddies. At that time, I remember I see old pictures of me, and I had short hair. So once I put that helmet on, no one really noticed the difference anyway. And I was one of the better players. I was just gifted. God gifted me with athletics, and I thrived in that environment. But I was really awkward. And I still am pretty shy when it comes to meeting new people and doing that. But I mean, God's grows you in that as you get older and older. But that was really apparent in my life in my teens and everything. Uncomfortable, wrestling with things. I remember probably at the age of 13, 14, really, like, as I started to hit puberty, I really started to hate I didn't hate my body, but I started to notice differences. And these differences would make me start to feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, why can't I just look like my buddy, my friend, the boys? And so I started to really wrestle with that. But something pivotal happened when I started to go to youth group. Is I noticed that my cousin and my other girlfriends that I had there started to be attracted to the opposite sex.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that I had become really close with one of my youth group friends, and I was wrestling with feelings for this person. And I grew up in a Christian home, and we, like, at a very, very young age, I can't remember ever not loving Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was a tension and a wrestle for me. And in the mid-90s, there was no conversations happening about sexuality. I remember at youth group and stuff signing a card at camp saying, the purity culture.
Yeah.
I will refrain from having sex outside of marriage. And it was almost like this fear-based. But then for me, it was like, well, I'm not even thinking of, that, having sex with a man. I'm like, oh my goodness, like, what's going on for me as a teenager?
Yeah.
Having these. And so I tried to really suppress it because I felt so much guilt and shame over my attraction to other women.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I definitely remember, I feel like we probably grew up around the same time. Abdu much earlier than us. But there really was this, in the 90s, it was still like, don't ask, don't tell.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just my personal preference, and all of that sort of, all this still sort of this like very private, to where when you learned about anyone having any sort of different sexuality or anything like that, it was still like a major shock. And there were the idea of, when I was in high school, the idea of someone being out, a lot of times you knew who they were, but the idea of them actually saying it just did not happen. And now it would be, obviously very, very different, and maybe even in some schools celebrated. But yeah, it was such a different world that I don't know that people, even, especially young people, I don't know that they even would understand that world today.
Yeah, there was no conversation. It was like, keep it. Well, I didn't know what it was. I still didn't have any language. I had heard about homosexuality in the Bible, and at church a little bit here and there. And all I knew is like what I thought in my little brain at like 13, 14 is like, if you have these feelings, you're going to hell.
Mm,
And so I was really fearful
mm,
of anyone ever knowing. And then I remember just lying in bed and crying out to God and asking him to take those feelings away. So hopefully I would wake up the next day and be able to go, play sports and do this. But I was always um, I always felt more masculine than I did feminine.
mm.
And that really, all of it together without any language just was like a volcano ready to rupture because I just felt so much guilt and shame. So I suppressed it.
Did you talk to anybody about it?
No, I say this, when I'm speaking a lot is I wish that there was a safe place within our community that I could have shared it. But even if there was, I don't know if I ever would have shared it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I felt so shameful and there was no language. We didn't talk. You had to look good on the outside, and all the inside can be, like screaming and messy.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the way that our culture worked. Like as long as you look good on the outside, then you figure out the rest, by yourself.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't a lot of talk about it. So no, I didn't share it until way later in my mid-20s, 30s even.
Okay. And at this point, did your understanding of did your feelings about your gender progress? Because you're about 13, 14 years old, and you start to feel attractions toward people of the same sex as you, and then at some point, there's a sort of a dawning on you that you're like, maybe I'm not really a woman.
Yeah.
So walk us to that part.
Yeah, it was I didn't even know that transgenderism even existed.
Mm.
Like at that point, it wasn't probably until my mid-20s where I realized that other people experienced the same thing as I did with my gender, and it really flared up in my mid-20s and 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So here I was just going, okay, like I'm just, a tomboy. I used to take clothes from my brother's room and put them in my bag and then go to school and put them on so I would feel more comfortable in my skin. And those were like behaviors that I used. And then, like I said, all the boys loved me because I was good and we played, I played basketball, volleyball, softball, hockey,
Mm-hmm.
and would be win awards, and so I thrived in that, and it gave me this almost freedom to be more masculine,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
than it was to go and play with the girls, because I had a couple cool girls at church that I got to know, but it wasn't my go-to. I didn't want to do the same things as girls and play ponies or Barbies or house. I wanted to play G.I. Joes and street hockey. Not that street hockey is a masculine or feminine thing to do, but at that time it was like more of the boys did that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just started to embrace that masculinity, so to speak, within me, and embrace being a tomboy and thrived in that arena. But something pivotal happened within our family because we were just what you say, a quintessential Christian family where everything looks good on the outside, but I didn't see what was coming at 14 years old. And this would propel me in a lot, and I'll get into that in a bit.
Yeah.
But my parents came to my brother and I, and they said they were going to get a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And even I remember telling some of my friends at church, and they're like, "No, not the Gillespies. Like, we looked like we had it all together," and this just crushed us.
Yeah.
Because we were a rigid Christian family with good boundaries, Christian boundaries and everything. And, my parents raised us. My mom was involved in the church on the worship team, and my dad was an usher, and my brother was doing worship. And so like we were highly involved, and we had Bible studies at our house on Wednesdays, and people would come over. And I started to call some of the ladies at the church, even aunt, and some of the men uncles. That's how close we were. And so for this to happen really shook up our life. So my mom ended up, I won't get into too much detail, but she ended up moving to the basement suite. And our family was never the same. My brother moved out at a young age. And here I was left with all this struggle internally, this turmoil of my sexuality and gender, and And I didn't know, because I was a pretty soft person. Like, I loved easy, I cared easy, I listened, I empathized with people, but there was this anger inside me.
Mm.
And that started to come out once my parents got divorced. And I just remember one day they sat me down, and my mom was ready. She had been dating somebody else, and she was ready to, get married and move in with him. And they sat me down and they said, Kyla, something like this, Kyla, we want you to choose who you want to live with.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
like, 14 years old. I was always a peacemaker at my home, and I loved both of my parents so much. And so really for me to choose was heartbreaking. My mom said I could live with her on weekdays and then my dad on weekends, or the opposite. And not knowing what to say, I just kind of, like, in the tears, just said, Mom. And so I did. My mom ended up getting married, and he was a unbeliever, and life changed because like I said, we were such a close-knit Christian family with all these boundaries. And now my mom is living with a non-believer, and I'm living with them, and I'm seeing, alcohol and things around that we never saw as a child, and as a teen. And now I'm left with my dad, who's living in this massive house by himself, and going there on weekends.
Mm.
So anger would be
Yeah.
something that rose up.
Mm.
What would you say, and now obviously you've had a lot of time to think back on that. Was the anger, did it feel like betrayal, resentment? Was it towards your parents, towards God? And how does that sort of then connect to your story and your struggle to your gender and sexuality?
Yeah. I don't think I was ever angry at God.
Okay.
What I didn't understand, and I think I took it on, and lots of teens and children of broken homes do this, is they just take it on themselves and say, man, I said this, and I won't speak for anyone else, but if I was just, if I didn't struggle with all the struggles that I had, and I was just a better child, maybe my parents wouldn't have got divorced. And so I put that on myself, along with all the sexuality and the gender confusion, and I just heaped that on me. And it was too big of a weight to carry, and it wasn't my weight to carry, and it was a lie. And I didn't understand God's character at that time. Like, I had a Bible, but I wasn't taught or discipled how to open it and learn and have a faith of my own. I had this faith at a young age,
Yeah.
and I loved God, but I didn't know him personally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't ever really angry at him. I just didn't understand God. Like, why are you not hearing me? I'm crying out to you, and I'm calling for help. And I guess what I concluded at that time was just that he was either angry at me or just didn't want to listen to me anymore because I had cried out too many times. And so, like I said, a distorted view of God's character, because now I know that that's untrue. He's always with us. He'll never forsake me. He loves me. He wants to hear my thoughts and cries to him. And he wants to be there in the midst of my brokenness. And so, yeah, that was, I think, for me, I just took it all on. And out of that, I believed that marriage was forever, and I had this princess kind of, I thought that my parents were, I guess I put them on pedestals,
Mm-hmm.
like most of us do.
Yeah.
And I thought they were untouchable and amazing, and they are amazing, but I didn't understand that they're just human too, and they struggle, and they're broken. And so I just kind of couldn't handle it all, and anger was what was inside me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember Bill Clinton talking about this with Chelsea. And of course, we all know, what happened with the Clintons.
Yeah.
And he said there's this moment, and every child goes through it to one degree or another, where you are faced with suddenly realizing that your parents aren't perfect. And depending on what it is that drives you to that realization, that can be just such a traumatic thing to then realize, and how it's realized can be so much worse, because they are your models for better or worse. They're even your models for trusting God. And there can be so much wrapped up in that.
Yeah.
And I can understand too how that weight that's put on you. I mean, you're struggling with your own identity, and then you put the weight of you were the one holding your parents' marriage together on top of you.
Yeah.
That, wow.
Well, I mean, so I have a follow-up question on this, because I think with what Derek just said and what you just shared is every human being struggles to figure out who they are at some point. And when sexual things come up and they're confusing, every kid at some level doesn't quite understand the feelings they have. Even if there's tremendous affection for someone who's a close friend of the same sex, we can easily misinterpret that to be romantic or sexual, as opposed to just deeply, filial or friendship kind of affection. So these things happen. But it sounded to me like when you said I sort of idolized your parents, maybe even idolized your parents' marriage, that formed a big part of your identity as well. And then this comes crashing down in the middle of other struggles on identity. And so, it doesn't seem like it's all that much of a surprise then that would cascade into something that was, as you put it, a pivotal moment in your own sort of self-understanding. Did it factor in, like, in terms of like seeing a healthy Christian marriage suddenly have this lightning strike it, and so that the idol is, oh my goodness, this thing really is just made of brass? Was that a big part of it?
Yeah, I think I never saw my parents fight. I never saw them argue, and my mom wanted to protect us, and I didn't see any of the bad parts of their relationship because it was always behind closed doors. And I think I felt pretty stupid. Like, I should have known this. I should have figured this out, and in that process, just going, okay, like, the two people that I love the most are giving up, and they're giving up on the covenant, which I didn't have language for a covenant, but the marriage that that they vowed to keep for the rest of their lives. I thought I held relationship and marriage up so high, and I just thought that that wasn't the way that it was supposed to work. And then I see my parents, marriage collapse, and it was just devastating for me.
Did you
Yeah. So
did you come to think of
Go ahead.
marriage that like a biblical marriage was kind of a scam?
After, yes, because I would later on get into a relationship and be like, wholly self-sabotage it. Because I was angry and I didn't believe in love, and my way of doing it was self-sabotage and pushing people away before they could hurt me. And I just that just started to become a pattern in my life. And because I said, well, I don't believe in forever, like, why even bother? It's broken. It's never going to last. If my parents can't last, then I don't think any marriage can last.
Yeah. Wow. So then how does it go into, to a point where, like, I'm going to transition. I'm not really a woman. I have a woman's body, but I'm not really a woman. How did you get there?
Yeah, long period of time of really wrestling. So what happened in my grade 12 year, I had my first boyfriend and my only boyfriend, and he was on a football team, and we got to know each other. And I said, because I had been praying, they taught us at youth group and camp to pray for a godly man to be raised up that I could one day marry. And so I prayed for that. And I thought that it was possible until my parents' divorce. And so this relationship, I thought, would fix everything. I thought if I have a relationship with another guy, then that would make all my, sexuality problems and my gender problems disappear.
Yeah.
And I could just be normal, like everybody else around me. Well, that didn't happen because I was attracted to people on my baseball team, like one particular person, not a whole bunch of people, but I was drawn to this person and I was attracted to them. And I realized, well, even in a relationship with a guy, these are still happening. Like, what's wrong with me? And so it would come into, we broke up, and then in grade 12, I had some friends who were playing hockey in Vancouver, and hockey became like my focus and passion. It was like my drive. Like you said, there's now a professional women's hockey league, and I had watched the Olympics and I wanted to play with Team Canada. And so, in order to get scouted, I heard that this team in Vancouver, which was a AAA women's team, would be the best opportunity if we go to a championship. Then there'll be scouts from Team Canada. So I didn't know what was coming, but I was like 19 years old, 18 years old, probably just going on 19.
Hmm.
And I made the team and I started to go play hockey in Vancouver, BC. And if you don't know where that is from where I grew up, it's a 2-hour ferry ride
Hmm.
from Nanaimo to Vancouver. So it was a lot. I would go there 3-4 times a week. But that was my first introduction into the LGBTQ plus community. And that's kind of where everything started to change.
Okay.
Before, I just lived in a sheltered home and a sheltered life, and there was no language. It was just me wrestling with this. And now I was seeing women older than me, and they were actually what you call out. And it looked so free.
Hmm.
They were just out and being able to not wrestle and struggle with the tension of being gay. And I didn't give up. I was fighting for faith, and I didn't give up in that period of time. But there was probably about 19, 20, probably about 4 years of really wrestling before I gave in and came out as gay.
Wow. Okay. Wow. And,
Yeah.
and so this community that you saw it to be a welcoming community, and that help with the whole coming out thing.
Yeah, it did help. I think what happened is as I got older, and as the times started to change, it was like I was attracted to other women, and I didn't share that when I was young. And then now these women are out and gay, and they have language, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is language that I needed because I'm wrestling with these things. And then I met other girls who are also attracted to other girls, and I started, there was this one particular woman at 23 where she was attracted to me and I was attracted to her. And honestly, like, I can't explain it any other way, but just being absolutely tired of the fight inside.
Hmm.
And I saw it so black and white to me. It was like either I could follow Jesus this direction, or I could follow this direction and come out as gay. And because my family was broken, and I wasn't going to church as much, and I was experiencing these things, I kind of gave up on following Jesus at 23 and came out as gay.
Hmm. Wow.
Yeah,
Well-
and thinking now too of like your faith in combination with this, I've heard some stories of there's some Christians who will eventually affirm something like transgenderism because, and there's a story of a woman who had, I think, a son who wanted to be a girl, and the idea was in her mind, okay, since we're Christians, then my child isn't gay, which and she had this very
Yeah, Helen Joyce actually gives a story about a Christian woman whose son was attracted to boys. I think is the story, and the woman was like, "Well, being gay is clearly a sin. The Bible doesn't say anything about changing your gender. So if my son becomes my daughter won't be gay."
Yeah,
I think that was the story.
Yeah. And so, what was that? Did that ever factor into any part of your decision to then transition, or what was it about saying you're gay that ended up not being sort of the ultimate sort of identity and sort of the rescue from the feelings you had been having?
Yeah, I thought being out as gay would fix everything that was broken in the inside, but it didn't. And it would probably be another probably till 25, 26 years old where I in the LGBTQ plus community, I was once a tomboy, back home.
Yeah.
And then they labeled me as a butch. And what that entitled me to be is more masculine than feminine. So in a relationship, I would act more masculine, and I embraced that. And that's when like the real gender confusion and struggles came out in my life. And it was more like I believed that God had made a mistake and I was born in the wrong body, and it just I started to meet a couple friends, and they were on my ball hockey team, and I was really engaged into the LGBTQ plus community, not anything to do with God at this point. Uh, and I met some people, and they were friends of mine, and they're like, "Well, we're transitioning," and I'm like, "What the heck is that?"
Mm.
You know, that you have to understand this was like before 2011 when I did fully transition. This was like a long time ago. It wasn't popular or cool to be trans. It was actually the opposite. In the gay community and the lesbian community, they didn't want to be your friend if you were trans because you're no longer a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't like they were parading around and saying, you know, like, look at me, this is so cool. It was really actually the opposite. So you had to really I guess you could use the word count the cost to
Yeah.
transition in the LGBTQ plus community. So I was wrestling with that. It was when, and I didn't share much of this, but at the age of 19, I was so lost and broken, and my dad's relationship with me and everything had been completely severed.
Mm.
And I ended up getting scouted and moving to Calgary, Alberta to train with the Canadian National Women's Olympic Program. And I picked up my first drink of alcohol because I just wanted to annihilate I just didn't want to feel anymore. And I had no clue what alcohol was or what it would do. And the first time I picked up alcohol, if I knew anything about alcoholism, I would have known I was an alcoholic because I blacked out. I just didn't have any stop in my drinking. And that allowed me to even suppress and numb things even more.
Mm.
And from that period of time, I had about 11 years of just broken relationships and alcoholism. And I realized that I had hurt so many people. And it wasn't until 2011 that I went into a recovery home, and it was a Christian facility. And I tell this in light of what we were just talking, is because it comes into, like, now I had to go to church again.
Oh.
Now it was mandatory for us to go to church on Sunday in this women's recovery facility, and a ministry called God Rock on Saturdays. And now my lives were colliding with God again. And so I say that because I did feel, I felt like the dysphoria was a lot at this particular time, but I also felt that people at church were looking at me so funny because I was more masculine and I had short hair, and I actually had a girlfriend at the time, and we would sit together at church, and I hummed and hawed about it, and I thought, like, man, if I just transition and become a straight man, I could just go under the radar at church and no one would ever say that I'm, living in sin and doing this wrong and looking at me funny and judging me, which I felt they were because I had always been misgendered. And it just was so much. But I did experience that in that moment when I had to go to church and stuff. I thought to myself, man, transition is looking even better.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the show. And before we go any further, I just want to say this. If you're watching this and enjoying the conversation, we'd love for you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so that you don't miss future episodes. Now, believe it or not, about 90% of the people who watch our videos aren't subscribed. And if just a fraction of you hit that button, it would make a huge impact for us. It's one simple, totally free way to support our ministry and help others discover thoughtful, Christian content in a culture full of conflict, one that's searching for meaning. So go ahead, subscribe, like, and share. It really does help us out. And now, back to the content. Wow, okay. So then you went, what were the steps when you decided we're going to do that? I'm going to do this. What were the steps? I mean, now, all the media attention is on how kind of easy it is for a pubescent or a prepubescent child to say, hey, I'm slightly confused. Oh, here's a bunch of drugs. And you clearly are transgender. Let's chemically alter you, and then maybe lead to surgery. But back then, that's not how it was. So walk us through that, because that's probably a different experience that people are used to hearing in the media.
Yeah, so it was 2011, and like I said, there was not a lot of transgender people. But in Canada at the time, and laws have changed, and everything like that. But when I was ready to transition, there was a process in Canada and through the government of British Columbia. I'll just say that in case people are wondering.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to go through a process. And because I had some friends that had already gone through the mainstream of transition at this time, they put me in touch with the specific doctors. There was only two doctors that could see you, two endocrinologists in BC that could see you, and you had to go through them. But first, you had to see a psychiatrist, and they would evaluate your life from beginning to end and determine whether or not I was severely dysphoric at the time. And I was about 30, 31 at the time. And I knew I didn't try to manipulate the conversation, but my friend said, all you have to do is, like hone in on this part of your life as being the biggest struggle in your entire life. And so I knew that going in. And so I was like, but it was honest. I did struggle all my life with this from a young age.
Mm-hmm.
And then she deemed me, after 5 sessions only, deemed me as severe dysphoric, one of the 1 to 2% that has severe dysphoria. And she determined that it was severe enough for me to go on start hormone therapy, and see an endocrinologist, and also see a psychiatrist who would help with if I wanted to go the process of having surgeries. And so all these things were already in place. And if you didn't see the right people at the right time, you wouldn't go through the process. And so she put me in touch with the endocrinologist, and, I didn't look male. I was still butch, and still, I thought I looked more masculine. And that was the first time when I walked in and saw him, he reached out his hand and he said, "Hi, Mr. Gillespie."
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, whoa,
Mm-hmm.
like the first person to ever acknowledge my dysphoric feelings and acknowledge my gender. And at that time, I was just like super excited. I was like, wow, okay. But I had seen the process from my friends, and I knew that the first year of being on hormones, and on testosterone would be really, really small and very gradual. And so I did see the endocrinologist, and he put me on a really, really low dose of testosterone to start. And of course, I didn't see any changes. So as a trans person, I was getting frustrated, and I just wanted it to happen. And then somewhere in the 6-month mark, just past the 6-month mark, I realized that people started to address me as him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I changed my name to Bryson
Mm-hmm.
at the time from my given name, Kyla. And just kind of, I was in a relationship, and I had told this woman that I was going to transition, and she was aware of it. And I said, if you want to be with me, you need to know that this is happening. And so I did. And then I saw the lady that determined whether or not I was dysphoric enough to have the surgeries, and I wanted to have them. And she said yes. And so I went through the process of that. In Canada and BC, it was a long process. There was only 2 doctors in Canada that could do reassignment surgeries. And one was in a province far away, and one was here in Vancouver. And so the wait list for the first surgery was a hysterectomy. That was quick, within half a year.
Mm-hmm.
And the other surgery that I wanted more than anything, because it was probably the most dysphoric body part of mine, was chest surgery, a mastectomy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be like a 4 to 5 year wait.
Mm-hmm.
So I got on the list, and I started the process of that, and then just continued to wait. But in BC at the time, which the laws have changed now, is in order to have your gender marker on your birth certificate or your driver's license changed, you had to have one of the 2 surgeries that I just listed, a full hysterectomy or a chest surgery mastectomy. And so I didn't think much about surgery at the time. I knew that I was okay with adopting children. I knew that I didn't want to bear children on my own at that time, and maybe my partner could. And so these all came into factors. So I was like, okay, in order to change my gender marker and everything, I'm going to have this full hysterectomy. And there was no guidance. There was no knowledge of the repercussions of having such an extensive surgery at the time. I just knew that I didn't want to start to pass as male and then get ID'd and people going like, what's going on? Or try to get a job and people are like, why does it have a F marker for female and you look like a guy? And so there was this really hard wrestle in between that period of time, but that was kind of the transition period for me.
Well, one of the questions pops into mind, and if it's too personal, please, feel free not to answer it. But at that moment, when you're going to go through these surgeries, one, you said you were eager in terms of the top surgery. Then there's the hysterectomy. And, when we hear about those surgeries now where someone's doing the full transition and it's going to be a phalloplasty or a vaginoplasty, these are when you find out what actually happens in these surgeries and the maintenance that needs to happen for years, if not the entirety of your life, it's enough to say, boy, do I really want that. At that time, what was it like to be informed about what's going to happen with your body after this? So you said one thing, there was not a lot of guidance in terms of the hysterectomy, but you sounded like you were like eager for the mastectomy. But were you like, outside of the normal nervousness of going through surgery of any kind, was there any kind of like, boy, what is this going to do to me? Was there any pause?
Honestly, I don't think on the two, but you're right. And I forgot to mention this. They asked me if I wanted to have bottom surgery.
Yeah.
And I'm forgetting the word. You just said it.
Phalloplasty.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so they asked me if I wanted to have that. At that time in 2011 and 12, it was like unheard of. I started to watch people on the internet, like talking about their transition and actually like making videos of it. And it was like, there wasn't a lot of doctors and there wasn't a good success rate at the time. It was very intense and dangerous. Mm-hmm. And there was no promise that it would ever, be what you wanted it to be. So the chest surgery and the full hysterectomy, I didn't think twice for the fact that I didn't think that they were really that permanent. Mm-hmm. In the fact that the full bottom surgery scared me.
Yeah.
That was like, you can't go back from that. Mm-hmm. And there was such like 4 or 5 different surgeries in order to have that. It was life altering.
Yeah.
So the other two, my friends that were trans, they said, if you have a hysterectomy, then the testosterone won't be fighting with the estrogen, and you will have better results in your masculinity, your voice, maybe a beard, all these masculine things. And so that was like a no-brainer. Mm. What my friends and the doctors didn't prepare me for each of the surgeries was how I realized how intrinsic body parts are when you lose them, when they're gone. And I remember waking up from both surgeries and I would have tissues in my hand and I would ask the nurse, like, what is this for? And she's like, you've just been weeping. And it happened for months, just out of nowhere, just weeping. And I was like, why? I didn't even care about this at all. And so why am I grieving? But I didn't give too much thought to it. I just wish people would have told me that it was so difficult. And so I just put that beside me and continued with my transition and didn't give it much thought after that, kind of numb myself and, just engaged in the things that I put focus into the things that I was doing in my life in order to, get over it.
Mm. Wow. I gotta say, Kyla, that idea of you lamenting the loss of part of your body, despite the fact that you were eager for the transition and were told to be advantageous to the transition, is really, really powerful. I think this speaks to, as I do a lot more study on Imago Dei and what it means to be made in God's image, and you look at, people often say things like, you are a soul, but you have a body. And while that's true, you actually are a body as well. We're not Gnostics. We don't believe the body is this thing we're trying to flee. It's this thing we're hoping to see redeemed. And there would naturally be, and if there are people who are gender dysphoric who are watching this or listening to this, and they're thinking about this, your testimony just now is probably going to come as a shock to some of them, that there's going to be a lament no matter how much you detest the dysphoria. And it is tough. I understand how tough it can be. I've never experienced that kind of dysphoria, but no one tells me it's pleasant, and no one tells me it's mildly uncomfortable. It's profoundly uncomfortable. So I get that. But what you just said there speaks so highly, or so effectively, I should say, about somatic integrity, that the body is meant to be an integral part of who we are. And the fact that your spirit and your emotions laments the loss of some things you were eager to lose suggests that even in the dysphoria, you recognize, I'm not meant to be other than I was born to be. That's a signal to me. When you look back at it now, does that sound like a signal of you were made in God's image as a female to bear God's image in a particular way, that essentialism of gender? You look back at it now and you see that mourning. You were surprised by it then, but when you look back at it now with your faith in the strength that it is now, do you look at it back now and say this is a reflection of something about the Imago Dei?
Absolutely. There's nothing that we can do. Like, we can numb ourselves and suppress things and, embrace, like I did. I embraced this lifestyle. I wanted it so bad, and no one was ever going to tell me different. But there was something, you're right. We're body, mind, and soul. We're embodied creatures. We just can't separate our body. See, the world nowadays says, like, if your mind tells you something, then submit your body, like change your body. And the Bible says it completely different. It's like, no, that's not actually it. If your mind is saying something, it's actually like the renewing of your mind that changes us. And so I think for me, it was just like, I didn't want to think about it.
Yeah.
But there was something crying out, even from the very beginning.
Quite literally.
And I literally couldn't suppress it, but I could try to ignore it. And that would continue in my transition for about 5 years, fully passed as male. God was speaking to me through church and his people, and I had a hunger for his word. I remember being a teenager and a child and just loving Jesus and the freedom that came with just, that relationship with him, even if it wasn't as intimate as I have now. But there was something about that, and God started to press in on things. I went on with both surgeries, but there was something pivotal that happened at this ministry called God Rock. After 5 years of going there, I was never going to go back. I had been bullied in the recovery rooms, and although this ministry didn't do that, the people would engage me there. And new people had taken over the ministry. And I talk about this in my testimony of the power of God's people and the church. And so these new people took over, and it was no longer a ministry where we just kind of opened up passages and talked about them like we were, or in recovery where they say you can have a God of your own understanding. And this God always looks a lot like us. It's not the God of the Bible. And for me, he sounded exactly like what I wanted, a transition and this, but that wasn't what God wanted for my life, I found out later. But yeah, these people started to actually open up the Word of God, and they started to show that their lives was completely surrendered to Jesus. And all through my life, I wanted people that loved Jesus more than themselves. I wanted to be discipled. I wanted to do this. And so they started to open up, home groups on Wednesdays. And I started to get to know them. And I always say this, like, they started to be vulnerable. And their vulnerability and their brokenness, nothing was off the table, with wisdom, obviously.
Right.
But they would talk about their wrestles and struggles before Christ and their wrestles and struggles now. And so I started to watch their life. And I'm like, these guys, I think they really love Jesus. And I think that they want to be my friend. And so I started to get to know them. We started to go out for coffee and we started to do life together. And it was probably about a year and a half after really walking with these people. And God had been really stirring up things in my life. And I started to question my transition. I started to question Imago Dei. I started to see scripture like I had never seen it before. I had read Psalm 139, 13 to 16, you formed my inward parts.
Yeah.
But God started to actually bring new light to these scriptures. Like, it doesn't matter what I do to try to change or run from everything. I will never be a biological male. I was predestined before the foundation of the world. He had plans and purposes for my womanhood. And this started to really eat at me. I was like, oh my goodness, and as I got to know them, I wanted to do more things. I started to feel like I was pressed to, do things like a preteen ministry. And at that time, I was really involved with them, still as Bryson, still male, but I wasn't allowed to lead in leadership. And we had not just one conversation, not just two, but hundreds of conversations, small, big, and it ended up me sitting down with BJ and Jess and telling them my story once I trusted them. And my pastor looked at me, and said, "We love you even more." And then I started to see that these people were real. They really did care for me. They wanted to meet me in the messiness of my life. And it didn't, because I was so fearful of telling any Christian of my past, and me being transgender after 5.5 years of living this way, no one knew. And at that time. And so, it was really powerful just sharing with them and seeing that their love for God, holding to a historical Christian view on sex and marriage, which they never denied, they never compromised, but being able to also love me while still holding to a Christian view on sex and marriage, not, affirming me and speaking lots of truth over time. But it was a friendship. Like, okay, you're wrestling and struggling with this. We don't want to kick you out of our circle, out of our church. We actually want to bring you in closer. And that changed my life as I started to wrestle and struggle with deep questions like, God, do I have the right to change my gender and sexuality? Like, God, how do I submit my life to you? Like, what are you even asking of me? And these were some questions that I started to wrestle with. And it was probably 1.5 years of walking really closely with this family when I started to become really depressed. I started to realize that all the surgeries and all the hormones would never fully satisfy me. I thought that maybe after this next surgery I would feel complete, but this never came. And I was crying out to God, and I remember so clearly one day on my bedroom floor 7 years ago, asking God to rescue me and save me. And this was different than just a help cry that I had done before. Like, God, help me get out of this situation and I'll surrender or I'll serve you. This was like a deep, deep soul cry. This was like, God, I have nothing left. And in that moment, I cried out to God, and I believe he met me and spoke to me so clearly in that moment and just said, "Return to me, Kyla." And I was a mess. I was weeping on the floor, and I'm like, God, but I don't know what that would look like if I would ever be female again. And I remember wrestling and asking him, can't I just follow you as Bryson, God? Like, I thought I could. I thought I could be a Christian and be Bryson. He would never ask me to detransition. And I heard him saying, this clearly, no. And I said, God, but I don't know if I'll ever look female again. And he said, do you trust me? And are you willing? And in that moment, all I could do is cry out to God and say yes. And that was the moment where he pierced my heart and he changed my life forever. And I couldn't deny that I was living against God's design and purposes for my life. And I confessed and I repented of trying to do it on my own. But you know, when you make a big promise and, you know, the next day you wake up and you're like, you know, God, are you sure you really asked all that of me? Like, do you really realize like what it's going to cost me?
Yeah.
And so in that moment, I asked and I said, God, you don't have to give me any more revelation. You've made it clear to me. But would you grant me one thing? Would you just give me one more, confirmation that this is what you're asking? Because I knew the cost was big. And so I told my friend Jess of all God had done and spoke to me that night. And so she invited me on Friday nights. The leadership team would have dinner together, and this was happening for years. And they would have dinner, they would open up the Word of God, they would sing and worship and then pray. And because I had repented, they invited me into this leadership night that Friday. And I asked if I could share with everyone, all my close friends. And there was about 6 or so of us. And so I did, I shared this. And in 2011, when I came into recovery, I was probably only about a month clean. The lady that was, part of the ministry, God Rock, had prayed and spoke a word over me one Saturday. And I was so fuzzy and blurry, and I don't remember much of it, but I remember her mentioning something of a pearl and a shell. And I said to God that day, okay, I have no clue what she's saying, but God, would you bring to mind anything that's important in the future if I need to know what she's saying? And so fast forward that 6 years, we were laughing and worshiping and praying and crying for all God had done in my life. And they asked, can we lay hands on you and pray for you? And I said yes. And I was like kneeling down before God and just in awe of him and excitement, but also very scared. Mm-hmm. And in the prayer, Jess started to pray for me. And she said, I believe that God and the Holy Spirit want you to know that he's the pearl. He's the treasure. Mm. And she would have never known 6 years ago that God had given that word to that lady to speak over my life. And when I realized, in my self-centeredness in early recovery, I thought I was the shell of the pearl and I was really rough and God was going to make me beautiful like the inside, a real pearl. Mm-hmm. And what I realized when Jess spoke those words over my life and I had asked for one more confirmation is he was the pearl. It was never me. He was the greatest treasure, and I had been searching my life for satisfaction and purpose and congruence, and he was the answer to it all. And so I just fell on my face and wept before God, and I said, I know what God's asking of me, and that was the moment. And then from there, I gave my life in full surrender to Jesus.
Wow. I have to pause for a moment and just say something about what you just shared. And I had about 10,000 questions that popped up while you were speaking, but I'm like, I'm not going to say a thing. Just keep going. What occurs to me, among the many things that occurred to me while you're talking, what was the universal applicability of what you just shared. Someone might think that this conversation is just about people who have gender dysphoria or struggle with sexuality issues or just identity issues. And while that's clearly applicable in that situation, as we try to find our identity, true identity as God has actually ordained it, and find a wholeness and a peace there, this applies to worldviews. I can recall I had similar situations and struggles where I came from a different worldview, a different religious worldview. I didn't have any, gender or sexuality dysphorias or questions, but there was a worldview issue. And, I remember asking myself, could I just stay this way despite all the truth that I'm hearing? Can I just call myself this or say this? It would be so much easier. And the answer was no. And I've got to say, there's a number of people I know who have gone through, and you name the worldview, whether it's secular or religious, who are confronted with the claims of Christ and confronted with the credibility of what he has offered to us, who go through something maybe not as dramatic and as drastic as what you went through, given the years you went through it, but at some point comes to that pivotal moment where the truth is undeniable. God draws somebody, and at some point, it's are you sure? This is going to really be painful. And of course, we know from the scriptures that Jesus promises us that, one, you'll find fulfillment, but you won't find comfort. You will find comfort eventually. But on this side of life, there's going to be a cost to pay. And that's just part of the Christian walk. It just is. So I wanted to pause and just say, if someone's watching this or listening to this, the reality is Kyla's story is not for one particular person, although it is that. It's for so many particular people who are at that crossroads moment where they're saying, have I been running so long because of the consequences? Not because of the truth, but because of the consequences. So thank you for sharing that. It was incredibly, incredibly powerful, what you just shared. And I hope that people see the universal applicability of the whole thing. I really do.
I think you're completely right, and that's why I'm so passionate about sharing my testimony and going into churches and sharing with people, because what my friends really displayed to me was this, like you said, a universal brokenness. It's always a heart problem. It's always a worship problem for all of us. And they started to show me that the differences outweighed the similarities outweighed the differences. Because at first, when I met them, I was just like, well, you guys don't know what it's like to experience gender dysphoria. You guys don't know what it's like to live with same-sex attraction. You don't know what it's like. And then I started to hear their stories and their wrestles and struggles. And I'm like, after my defenses dropped and I trusted them and I knew they loved me and I loved them, it was like, no, like I see more, similarities in our brokenness as humanity, as human beings, than I do of gender dysphoria or, body dysmorphia, dysphoric feelings that my friend had. Like they were different, but they were of the same.
Yeah.
And so I could really, really appreciate that. And that's always what I hope when I share my testimony, is that we could see the similarities instead of all the differences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the scripture when, it applies loosely. So forgive me for applying it a little bit more loosely, but I think of, no temptation has befallen you, which is not common to man. In other words, everyone kind of goes through the same struggles. I'm not saying this is temptation or whatever it might be, because it's a different thing. It's a psychological phenomenon, but no temptations befallen you, which is not common to man. So it's basically saying, remember, we're all in the same boat. In Arabic, we have this phrase, "Kulna fil hawa sawa." In English, we have the same phrase. It's, we're all in the same boat. Arabic, it's we're all in the same wind, or all in the same air, which the connotation means we all smell the same stink, and we create that stink. And there is a beautiful solidarity that recognizes our common brokenness, but also recognizes, that there's a common grace and also a common offer for the salvation from our sin, from our common sin. So our Savior, God so loved the world, as it were. So I think this is really important that people hear this. You might have some stuff you wanted to ask, Derek. You probably do. I have an observation I wanted to make, and feel free to shoot it down, like with double, anti-aircraft guns if you want to. But it seems to me, hearing your story, that there is a way we think of dysphoria as my mind and my body don't match up. that my mental impression of my gender and my physical, the expression of my gender, the sex that I was born into, don't match, and that creates dysphoria. As I hear your story, though, what I really hear, especially in the struggles you have with God, is that the real dysphoria was between your spirit and your mind, not your mind and your body. Like that at some point, what your mind was struggling with, your spirit knew the truth and it was being drawn by God. And so what you struggled with was the real dysphoria, was what your mind was wrestling with and what your spirit knew to be true. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that we can't, yeah, I think that there's a lot of truth in that, because ultimately I think it is our broken state in this broken world that is at war with how we were designed to be in, like with Adam and Eve in the garden, full communion with brain, mind and body and soul all in line with that open communication and with our maker and creator, and everything was perfect. And then now we're broken and it's distorted. And I think that I've learned that it's more than gender dysphoria that I experience. Is more than an incongruence with my body and my mind. You're right. It is I don't know how to explain it, but it is a spiritual incongruence that, yes, it does come out in, gender dysphoria to a certain degree. Like sometimes I'm uncomfortable with myself. I'm uncomfortable in my own skin. I feel like I should look more feminine than I do. And I wrestle and struggle with those. And I have to hold those thoughts captive. And I have to say, okay, what does a biblical woman look like? What is God asking me to do? And I want to be that woman. I want to be soft and meek and empathetic, and like I want to embrace the characteristics of Jesus more than I do any cultural boxes and stereotypes that people put on me. And how do I reconcile that with you, God?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't care what the world says, but I'm also not behaving in a way that is heightening these behaviors and these thoughts, and who am I hanging out with and what am I taking in? All these things are fights in our mind.
Yeah.
And it's in the spiritual realm that we see victory, by taking our thoughts captive, by submitting them to Christ, by trusting, even when I feel a certain way. Yes, I acknowledge my feelings and my incongruence, but I acknowledge the truth of who God created me to be. And that's going to rule my life. That's going to rule my mind. And I'm going to live by that. Now, every day is not, perfect. And I wrestle and struggle big time, like as all of us do.
Friends, we're going to have to pause our conversation right there, because Kyla gave some incredible insights further on in our conversation. And what we want to do is save that for the next episode of All Rise. But make sure you tune in, because you've heard Kyla's story, but you're going to get some great insights on the cultural mood that's going on right now, how to actually talk to people who are experiencing gender dysphoria, and what really tipped it in favor of the gospel for Kyla. So we've had a wonderful conversation. The conversation ranged on and kept going. It was really good. So I want you to tune in next episode to hear more from Kyla Gillespie.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.